Kyle, so as not at the delay during when the event starts, we are live now on YouTube. We don't have to start now, but we're live.
Everyone, we're going to take a few minutes to get started. We have people jumping in. I just ask that everyone remain on mute so that we don't get feedback from the speakers. Thank you.
Is that apple juice, Peter?
Just say it is.
You're on mute, Peter.
Yes, it was,
Uh-huh.
and it's the old-fashioned kind. I get it at a farm stand, so
Oh,
I love it. It's just great. It's saves me from chewing on an apple. You can drink it.
I hear you.
How's your children? How's your son doing?
It's so funny. He's doing great. Thank you. He just called me. My daughter's on spring break this week. There's no school. So she went over today to she went to his house. They're making dinner and hanging out with him and his girlfriend.
Oh,
So
good for them. Good for
just
them.
called me to give me the update.
Yeah. Always good to hear from the kids, especially during this time.
Yeah.
All right, thanks again, everyone, for joining. I'm going to give a couple more minutes for our attendees to log in and a couple of our panelists as well. Okay.
Taina, can you give me access to that document you sent me earlier?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Hi, Rose.
Hi, good to see you. Hi, everybody.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, Jessica. Hi, everybody. But Rose, I haven't seen in the longest.
Jessica, that bear behind you looks like it's been drinking too much.
So I'm actually on vacation because it's also spring break for my younger one. And I drove up to Vermont today. So I'm in my best friend from Stuyvesant lives up here, and I'm in her son's room, quite obviously. It's the only place I could find that was a little bit quiet. So I'm going to do my best to stay till 8. She's going to try to feed the kids, but yes, so it does look like a drunk bear.
Yes. And, the good news is not your husband. Okay.
No, my husband is at work.
All right, I think we've hit critical mass, so I'm going to get started. So I just ask that everyone put their Zoom on mute. All right. All right. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's program. My name is Kyle Athaid. I'm the chair of Manhattan Community Board 6 and will serve as our moderator tonight. Over the last several months, Manhattan Community Boards 1, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 have had conversations with one another about the issues each of our communities have been facing and how the pandemic has exacerbated long-standing problems while unearthing inequities that have been buried for far too long. One of the issues of great concern to us all is the changing housing market and how it affects the livability and character of our neighborhoods, which has led us to produce a series of programs for the public focused on this very topic. Tonight's program, Pricing Out Mom and Pop, How Does the Changing Housing Market Affect Small Businesses, is the result of this collaboration. Our first program was held in January and centered on increased housing market prices and affordable housing. Tonight, we will discuss how small businesses are impacted by changing housing markets, approaches to support our small businesses, and where we go from here. As we look to a post-pandemic city, we want these discussions to spur positive and lasting change, especially as we welcome new political leadership later this year. It is our hope that this program will allow us all to hear from those who are directly impacted by these issues about their own experiences and their ideas for thoughtful policy approaches going forward. This is the time for all of us to harness our civic energy and to come together to help shape the future of New York City. So before we begin, we would like to extend thanks to our co-sponsors for tonight's program. This includes State Senator Liz Krueger, State Senator Brad Hoylman, State Senator Jose Serrano, State Senator Brian Benjamin, Assemblymember Harvey Epstein, Assemblymember Dan Quart, Assemblymember Rebecca Seawright, Assemblymember Al Taylor, Assemblymember Inez Dickens, Assemblymember Deborah Glick, New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer, Councilmember Keith Powers, Councilmember Carlina Rivera, Councilmember Ben Kalos, and Councilmember Bill Perkins. We thank you for your collaboration and partnership in informing the public about this program. So for members of the audience, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom to input any questions or comments, and please be sure to be as clear and concise as possible. And if your question is directed to a specific speaker, please notate that as well. We will address all of these questions towards the end of the program. As a reminder to all, this program is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. I've included the link in the chat box, and it will be available to view afterwards. Now I'm pleased to welcome our esteemed panel. First up, this panelist doesn't need an introduction, but I'll do it anyway. It's Gail Brewer, the 27th Borough President of Manhattan. She first took the office in 2014 and previously served on the City Council for 12 years, representing City Council District 6. As Borough President, she oversees the Small Business Task Force and recently published a roadmap for recovery to save Manhattan small business. So thank you, Borough President, for giving us your time tonight.
Thank you, Kyle, very much.
Next, just gonna.
Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Rose Pierre-Louis. Rose Pierre-Louis is a highly recognized public sector leader known for driving social and economic change. She currently serves as the COO of the McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research at NYU. Prior to this role, she served as commissioner of the New York City Mayor's Office to Combat Domestic Violence and as Manhattan Deputy Borough President from 2006 to 2013. She's an attorney by profession and has taught at Fordham University School of Law. Thank you, Rose, for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.
Next up is Jessica Walker. She is the president and CEO of the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce, which represents and supports the business community across the borough. She's a public policy expert who has advocated on behalf of New York City residents, neighborhoods, and businesses for more than 15 years. Before joining the Chamber, Jessica was Vice President for Government Affairs at the Partnership for New York City, an organization that represents the city's major corporate employers. In this role, she helped strengthen New York City's economy and create jobs in the wake of the Great Recession. Thank you for joining us, Jessica.
Thanks, happy to be here.
Jessica Lappin is the president of the Alliance for Downtown New York. The organization manages New York City's and the country's largest business improvement district and works to ensure that Lower Manhattan is a thriving and dynamic community. In this role, she has led a number of groundbreaking efforts in community development, including a first of its kind innovation hub and collaboration center called Lower Manhattan HQ. Prior to her tenure at the Alliance, Jessica served 2 terms in the New York City Council representing District 5. And a little personal story, I first actually had the opportunity to meet Jessica when I was an elementary school student at PS 183 on the Upper East Side. And she was one of the youngest staffers for Councilmember Gifford Miller. So this is a sort of, returning to basics again. So
I'm still young, Kyle, still young. I love you, like former council member of District 5. Like really, you should have said CV6 and CV8 rep.
Exactly, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Next up, we have Brian Owens, who is a native of Bayside, Queens. Brian Owens grew up in the Manhattan pubs and restaurants that his father owned, winding his way through every aspect of the business from the kitchen to the host stand. So this is really mom and pop in its truest sense. Brian established Crave Fish Bar in Midtown East and is a member of the James Beard Foundation's Smart Catch program. Due to the success of the Midtown East location, Brian expanded the Crave brand to the Upper West Side. And in response to the pandemic, Brian teamed up with fellow restaurant owner Ken McCoy to form the Restaurant Row East Alliance, which represents 12 of the 13 retail spaces between 50th and 51st Street and 2nd Avenue. So thank you, Brian, for joining us tonight. Next up, we have Sharon Hershkowitz, who is the owner of the Balloon Saloon, a family-owned balloon decorating and retail business which has operated in Tribeca for over 40 years. Balloon Saloon has been voted the most fun store in New York City and has ranked as a top 5 small business in New York City. So thank you, Sharon, for joining us tonight as well.
Thank you for having me.
Next up, we have Peter Walsh. And this is probably one of the most interesting bios I've ever read in my life. So if you get a chance, please check out the link in the chat box and view his very eclectic biography. He's done everything you could ever imagine. But the reason why he is here is because for over 35 years, he has owned Coogan's Restaurant in Washington Heights with the greatest partners in the world, David Hunt and Tess McDade. Coogan's is known as the world's #1 runner's bar. As many of us may recall, in 2018, Coogan's was the subject of national and international news when it was at the risk of closing due to exorbitant rent increases. In response to this, the Upper Manhattan community came together, including support from a guy named Lin-Manuel Miranda, to help keep its doors open. But unfortunately, during the pandemic, Coogan's had to close its doors. Yet, Peter is continuing the Coogan's spirit by creating the Coogan's Community Fund to help small businesses within the community. Coogan's will also be the subject of a documentary by Glenn Anderson and a book by John Michaud. So thank you, Peter, for giving us your time tonight as well. And then last but not least, we have Peter Arnston, who's the district manager of the Columbus Amsterdam Business Improvement District. He has worked with nonprofits for more than 40 years and has experience with emergency food pantries, low-income co-ops, community gardens, recycling operations, and job training. So again, thank you to all of our panelists for joining us tonight. And now let's get to discussion. So I want to begin our discussion with a question for each of our panelists that speaks to your expertise and experiences. So for the audience members, quite often in such discussions, there are multiple interpretations of whatever issue is being discussed. So to ensure that we're all starting with the same foundation for our conversation, I'd like to ask some basic baseline questions, which will serve as a springboard for later topics. And once we establish this foundation and begin to discuss other topics, I encourage all of the panelists to jump in and converse with one another, and of course, the public to submit your questions and comments. So let's get to it. So the first question I actually have is for Jessica Walker at the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce. So this might sound like a pretty obvious question, but as we think about the rest of this discussion tonight, are the changing housing markets a threat or opportunity to small businesses? I think this is an interesting point to set.
Yeah, and I'm going to stay I'm going to cop out a little bit. I'm going to say it depends. So, I mean, changing housing markets basically affect your customers and your rents. So, you know, basically when the housing market is shifting, that means your customer base is also changing. And that can be a threat or an opportunity, depending on how nimble and innovative the business can be. So it could be an opportunity. The other thing is, of course, the housing markets affect rents. Right now, we're seeing, as a result of the COVID crisis, the lowest residential average rents since March 2015. So that is also, you know, that actually could affect what the prices are in a specific area for commercial rents as well. And that could actually create some opportunities for small businesses that are looking to relocate to certain neighborhoods or looking to launch. So it's sort of a non-answer, but it depends.
No, that's a great starting point. And actually, I want to throw it to Jessica Lappin in very similar way as you've overseen this bid, and particularly thinking about the area that you represent, obviously has gone under a lot of change before you took over the presidency of the Downtown Alliance and is obviously continuing to change as well. But as we see the changing housing market, what can small businesses do to adapt and survive to some of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been really helpful in the pandemic, quite honestly, that we do have, or did pre-COVID, have 64,000 people living downtown. given that maybe 10% of the commercial like worker population is back, I think we would have seen many, many more businesses die on the vine if it weren't for kind of our strong residential community that has built up really over the last 10 to 20 years. So that has been helpful. And I mean, I think in terms of demographics and really how businesses adapt, I mean, certainly what we saw pre-pandemic, but very much enforced, is this need to use social media kind of more aggressively than ever. So, we've tried to help our small businesses by giving them a free platform. For example, our restaurants to do online ordering without being price gouged by Seamless and Grubhub and others. We gave grants to people in the spring to help them pay their rent. So giving, I think sort of from the private or non-for-profit sector, giving these businesses tools to help them survive, but how they survive is really adapting in terms of how they're using technology to reach people who just haven't, there hasn't been that foot traffic. And I think people's spending patterns are going to continue to evolve even after the pandemic. One of the things we do is we do a lot of research internally that we put online for free that tells business owners, small or large, here is your customer base. Here's who they are. Here's where they live. Here's their median income. Here's their educational level. Here are their interests. So, I think it's been a really, really tough road. And I don't think there's any way, I know this isn't about COVID, but there's no way to have a discussion about anything in terms of our economy right now that doesn't touch upon COVID. And it's been so hard for people to hang on and to survive. And I think, and I hope that as they adapt in the future, using research, using tools, using social media, it's going to be really key for them to understand who their audience is and reach them in new ways.
That's a great point as well, because I think, during this discussion as well, we're going to talk a lot about what was occurring before the pandemic. Obviously, we have just gone through this year and everything is sort of in flux and impacted in different ways. There were issues that existed before, which are now exacerbated or have sprouted new challenges because of the pandemic as well. So I definitely look forward to getting more into that as well. But really interesting with that too is thinking about the businesses that have not been able to survive, but also the impact by, as both Jessicas have mentioned, about customer bases and rents and things of that nature. I want to ask you, Rose, what impact does the displacement of small businesses have on neighborhoods? And then in reverse, the cycle, what impact does residential displacement have on small businesses? Because I see there's sort of two paths to this that we're seeing.
So again, thank you so much for having me, and kudos to all of the community boards that have come together to talk about these issues. And I'm going to be wearing, for most of tonight, my hat as the founder of the Frederick Douglass Boulevard Alliance. So I would say in response that it's a bit complicated when you want to respond to these questions. First, I would say the changes in the housing market have really been an accelerant for dramatically increasing not only the costs for residents to live in communities like Harlem, with rents and prices for condos escalating, but also it's caused mom and pop businesses, particularly those in immigrant and communities of color, to be displaced. One, because the escalation of rent, and a lot of times those businesses are replaced by big box chain stores, gourmet or other upscale types of markets. So these mom and pop businesses, again, also pushed out at the same time as these communities are developing. Landlords have taken advantage of these opportunities and, shortened the term of the leases or dramatically increased the rents. I would say in places like Harlem, particularly Central Harlem, absolutely there has been residential displacement, but there has also been a tremendous influx of people into the community, taking advantage of, comparatively speaking, those who were living who are not indigenous to communities like Harlem or Northern Manhattan that have come to take advantage of the housing stock. So if you think of places like Frederick Douglass Boulevard in Harlem, which used to be several abandoned acres of land, and through the power of rezoning, helped to create not only a thriving commercial and residential corridor, but also Restaurant Row and strong retail. The other piece of it is that there is now a housing stock that once these communities that were referred to as the inner city are now referred to by newspapers like the New York Times in their real estate section as, you know, the new Gold Coast in Harlem. So while, yes, sadly, the people who have stayed through the good, bad, and the ugly and are what make these communities so great and historic, they've certainly been pushed out because it's so expensive. Because when you're thinking about who is it affordable for, and looking at things like AMI, for neighborhoods like Harlem, I think it has had not only the opportunity to bring in new businesses, increase our housing stock, but those mom and pops that have been with us, have been the character of our communities, have been displaced for all of those reasons.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that's definitely something I want to, delve into throughout this conversation as well, is really about how these communities have been cut up and, organized according to, what's come up and coming in the rent market. One of the things that comes to mind is the East Village and the Lower East Side and Alphabet City, and how it's basically been the same area for a long time, but in order to increase the rent market, changing what that identity is and what those even terminology is for that as well. So definitely want to hear that as well. But I want to throw it back down to the Manhattan Borough President, because of course the government plays a big role in this as well. And so we wanted to get some perspective from the Borough President, who's also done a lot of work on this as the city council member in a previous role. But thinking about how his government is investing public dollars in communities, do you see that it tends to prioritize investing in newer businesses and drawing in particular corporate businesses at the risk of disinvesting in existing businesses?
Well, we certainly had that problem with the first PPP, and we learned the hard way. Either the small business was working with a large bank that had no caring for them, as opposed to one like Carver, which got them the loans, or other small banks. That was just a hard lesson. So in terms of federal government, right now as we speak, Senator Schumer today is announcing, and I think it's going to happen, that the Restaurant Relief Fund, 28.6 billion from the federal government, so I don't know what for New York, and that is a grant, and it goes to a restaurant, and it's for rent, payroll, vendors, whatever you want. Whatever the amount is, I don't know for New York. But the reason I mention that, after, really failed federal application process, I think we're learning, and to his credit, no more loans, we want grants. So that could be helpful to some of the restaurants in terms of government. And then the state, some of you may know better than I, but the state's immersed in budget right now. 2-house bill, 1-house bill, governor's bill, I don't know. But they are trying to come up with $1 billion from the feds to go to New York State. This would be for small business, $500 million for a grant, another $500 million for a grant, different kinds of small businesses. But $1 billion, again, how much comes to New York City, I don't know. But again, that would be grants, and it would be for a wide variety, not just for restaurants, but for small businesses. These small businesses, and Jessica and I have been working on this, Lappin and Walker, I don't know, I feel like I've been doing it my whole life. They need grants and they need money for rent. And that's why the alliances, downtown alliances, help during the worst of the pandemic was so helpful, because it was actual dollars in their hands. I lost 2 restaurants that I was working on in Harlem this year. I felt like crying. I tried everything. And there just wasn't the $52,628 for the rent. there wasn't this ability to pay that. I couldn't get it. So the landlord said goodbye to these two amazing small Black-owned businesses. So and somehow, Empowerment Zone doesn't seem to have that kind of money, Rose. I don't know. I tried them too. It never seems to come together for these small businesses. So I think the answer to your question is we have to find a way, because there's not much silver lining in this pandemic and we've lost a lot, but now we have a lot of vacancies. How can we make sure with some of this government, because could we use this? Could we figure out something as was done years ago with the Liberty Bond program after 9/11? Jessica Lappin knows more about it than I do. But, there were some lessons from that could perhaps go to some of our small businesses. I don't want the chains. Everybody knows me. I can't stand them. But how do we have an eclectic, interesting streetscape? Now, I was really upset because recently somebody said, Gail, I'm leaving Manhattan. I'm going to Atlantic Avenue, Brooklyn, which is the worst thing you could tell Gail Brewer, because it is surviving, thriving, exciting streetscape. There's just a really great group of restaurants there, small businesses there, and the community is supporting them because they are so interesting and they have the support of the community. So, again, Manhattan is very different. Rents cost more, different clientele. The front page of the Times today is stating how all of the businesses have not come back to 10, 15% that Jessica mentioned, et cetera. So we have a whole different world to work on in Manhattan compared to the other boroughs, which are much more residential. I think the answer to your question is we need the federal, we need the state, the city. We need to work on getting rid of the commercial rent tax, at least for even more. Dan Garodnick tried, but we need to do an even better job. So I think, and then of course we did a zoning, as you know, in the Upper West Side. Peter can talk more about that. And we're waiting to get the data on the bill that I passed. It'll give us every single store that is vacant has to be in a database provided by the owner of the building. So every vacancy, square footage, previous rent. This was all done pre-pandemic, but now many more vacancies. With that data, I'm hoping we can work on a plan to say, how can we have more Atlantic Avenue kind of strips working with, it always helps to have a bid or a chamber of commerce to be able to come to some kind of a commercial support mechanism. It is also challenging when you don't own the building. I can tell in an area of Manhattan who owns their building, because that that store, that business, that restaurant, that deli, that bodega has been there for a long time because they managed to buy the building above.
So yeah, so we're gonna jump into that as well about
so those are just some of the ideas, Kyle, and thank you.
Yeah, but I do have a follow-up to what you were just saying. And I know that you've started the Small Business Task Force, and I have the report here with
me too.
Physical copy. So I suggest everyone to take a look at it as well. But do you have any data on what the displacement rate is for small businesses in higher housing markets? How that changes, or is that something that the group is still coming together on? And I know
we will have that in, hopefully we were supposed to have it by the end of March 2021. It's going to be the end of April 2021. That's the vacancy bill that I mentioned, because that will tell us every owner of every building that has a commercial storefront, second, first floor, has to tell the Department of Finance the vacancies. So you'll be able to look at that and determine when that vacancy took place. This is supposedly, every database has its own pluses and minuses. When it became vacant, what the last rent was, and what the square footage is. That would be an amazing data set to be able to work from. I'm all about, as you know, the data. Let's see what Department of Finance, I don't have full confidence, except that I call them every week to see how they're doing. So they know that it has to get done. That, I think, Kyle, will give us an amazing treasure trove that will tell us what you just asked for.
Absolutely. So moving on to Peter Arnson. So from your perspective, does the increased housing market deter or attract small businesses to your neighborhood? And you're on mute, Peter, sorry.
I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm talking to Peter Arnson.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for having me. Sorry about that. Similar to what Rose said, this is complicated. I believe we benefit from the diversity of our neighborhood. Small businesses can benefit from the increased cash and capital from new people. But rising housing prices attract speculators who are not interested in being part of our community. It raises the expectation of profit, boosting commercial rents and limiting small businesses that are trying to develop a market for their product. The prospect of quick money can give preferential status to chains, and that detracts from the viability of the neighborhood because those businesses' decisions are not made on a local level. Most don't contribute anything unique to the character of the neighborhood. Our area has a mix of housing that includes HDFC co-ops that attracted residents with a long-term commitment to the neighborhood, together with small local landlords and nonprofit operators. These have provided important stability to counter the rising rates of rent and have right-sized that expectation of profit. More recently, retail rezoning that Gail mentioned has protected small storefronts. This has encouraged landlords to engage with new small operators. Reflecting its importance, the requirement for small space in new developments has been picked up by Community Board 7. These have had a spotty but cumulative impact on the retail real estate market. We have had 5 new restaurants open in the past year, and that has been really pleasing. Thanks.
That's interesting. Thank you, Peter. So from one Peter to another Peter, Peter Walsh. Obviously, you've been in this business for a very long time, and obviously you've seen the best of times, the worst of times. So I want to talk a little bit more about the early warning signs. So what, in your experience, have been the early warning signs that a business is going to be priced out of their neighborhood?
One is you start talking to yourself and you find out it's an argument. What more seriously, when you find you're changing your menu prices more than the usual amount, you like to do menu prices, the most twice a year, at optimum once a year. But to keep up with your food prices, your rents and everything, if you find yourself changing your menu prices more often, you have a problem. So that's from the inside view of cost. Then from the outside, when you notice empty stores, they're the same things that everybody else notices. I have found that in poorer neighborhoods or undernourished neighborhoods, that the small business is more important and more thriving than it is in, say, well-to-do neighborhoods. In small neighborhoods, they don't use Amazon because they don't have credit and they don't have that amount of money to spend at that optimum time. Also, if they get the packages, they'll be stolen. It helps if you have a doorman receiving your packages from Amazon. So the undernourished neighborhood becomes a lot more important with small business and keeps small business thriving because of all those negative reasons. As I said, noticing other stores closing, it's right away. It's the number one thing. But now you also have to ask yourself, why would you want to have a small business in New York City? It is basically, New York is one of the worst cities to start a business. Nothing against you, Borough President, but it's ranked 69th in starting businesses, 80th for the ease of running a business, and 88th in taxes. That's really not an inviting list of numbers. Now you had 1 million people coming into New York City that you don't have coming like they did. You probably have 30% of that coming inside, or 40% the most. You have 7 out of 10 workers from the hospitality business who are now gone. There's 44% unemployment in the hospitality business. This is not going to recover fast. If you said the pandemic was over tomorrow, the habits of people have changed, and people's habits have changed, and that could take possibly a couple of years for them to readapt to whatever the new city is. And our leadership in the city, at the mayor's office, I think has been fairly negative as far as staying on board. I mean, we should be reinventing the city at this point, and we should be looking at the possibilities of what small business is. You don't have shoemakers anymore. You don't need people throw away their shoes. You have barbers that are important. You have the hospitality business. You have, to a certain amount, so many stores that are never going to reopen again. Between 57th Street and 79th on Madison Avenue, it's been counted 50 stores vacant. That is unheard of for New York City. Madison Avenue is the shopping area of the world, and you have 50 stores vacant. So when you come up to the north of Manhattan, to our neighborhood, yes, we have stores, but they're going to be filled. Our stores will be done because Amazon is not as much of a threat as it is in, as I said, an undernourished neighborhood.
Thank you. And actually, that's something that we're going to get into later in the conversation, is sort of this digital divide and how newer residents consume. What are their purchasing habits and things like that. But that's actually a perfect segue to Brian Owens. I know that you've started a number of businesses. I know that you mentor other businesses that are up and coming out as well. But everything that Peter Walsh just described, what advice would you give to a business in these types of conditions? How do you start?
Yeah, I think Peter's spot on in terms of the challenges of that what you're offering, can both benefit the local community and also, when the, suburban, office workers return, is that it's a great time to negotiate a rent that works for you, not just for the landlord. So I always used to say, you start making money when you sign a great lease. And I think more now than ever, you're seeing kind of retail rents return to the real estate crash. You're seeing numbers as low as that. And I think that that's going to at least fill some spaces. So I think you need more realistic landlords. And I think mom and pop landlords understand and more sympathetic than the big landlords who are okay leaving their spaces vacant.
And Kyle, I know you said you want to have a discussion. There are other people to speak up for 20 seconds. Just want to say thanks, Brian, for the shout out about Seamless and Grubhub. But even with rents falling, even with the economy as it is, we have retailers who are seeing their taxes rise threefold this year. So you can't talk about rent absent talking about the property tax increases that the city is levying. And that's just a piece of the puzzle. So I just wanted to throw that in the mix. Sorry.
No, thank you, Jessica.
And
Brian,
we love that, if you look at, the amount of the budget that's based on the, real estate property taxes. And if it's 45%, 50% annually, retail tenants pay a percentage of their building's, tax bill. So the fact that the space in front of us is being used for people who are just feeding a meter and paying, and now we can actually use that space to generate revenue, employ more people, and essentially contribute to the taxes of the city, it's been a lifeline to us. So that's been one success. And I know it's not, one size fits all. And I have a 20-foot wide storefront. Some people have 50 brings more seats. And if you have a fire hydrant opposed to, different challenges, that's where the suburbs has benefited from, having parking lots and having the ability to put up, permanent tents. We can't compete with that. What we can compete with is giving small businesses, immediate changes, immediate relief. We can't really wait 6 months from now. We need help right now.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say one thing about the retail too, because I have a lot of friends who've got clothing stores, mom and pop. The only way they survive pre-pandemic, during pandemic is 40% is online, and they have eclectic, I don't know what you call it, New York City clothes, made here, popular, etc. But I'm so frustrated because so many retailers just don't have that online support or know how to do it. And despite SBS talking about it, and I'm techie, I can't get SBS to really go hand to each and every store and figure out what we can do on the tech front. That may not come up, but that's the way my friends who have small mom and pop retail survive, was with this phenomenal New York based online support, and they do it themselves. This is not an Amazon thing. This is them, and it works. But not everybody does it because the city doesn't support them, in my opinion.
So that's actually the perfect point to bring in Sharon. So Sharon is a retail business owner and has been around for 40 years in Tribeca. And we all knew what Tribeca was originally. We know what it became. We know what it is now, and we know what it's going to become as well. So I actually want to throw that to you. As a retail business, how has the increased housing market changed the cost of business for you or the method in which you operate? Oh, and you're on mute, Sharon.
Sorry. Thank you for having me. It's good to be in this group. I have some comments for Gail. Firstly, I'm going to say that the demographics has changed since, of course, the beginning of time when we came, when it was all industrial and city workers in all the lofts. They were artists, and it was a whole different scene. There were no families. There were no supermarkets. It was eggs and dairy up on Duane Street, and shoes that would be between Hudson and West Broadway. And then from West Broadway to Church, it was a shoe business. And it was completely different, the whole thing. So we've gone through a demographic change, and we've gone with the neighborhood. So instead of it being city workers where we sold a lot of funky stuff, even some like cute, sexy things, when it became a family-oriented business, we pivoted towards that. So we're used to the demographics changing. What is not anything that we can get used to? Zero. And I know, Kyle, you said stay away from it, but I have to tell you, from a point of view as a retailer, and in fact, just yesterday when someone came in threatening homeless, mentally ill, it's a horrible thing. The crime is so awful. The homelessness, the transportation where my employees are afraid to be on the train because there's all kinds of people in need of mental illness help, and they're afraid to come into work. This has nothing to do with COVID. Sanitation, it spills over in the streets. So the city has become such a dismal place to operate in. I appreciate the restaurants having this beautiful space in the city, like Europe having street places to eat. But I have to tell you, there's a flip side that nobody sees. If I'm doing deliveries and I need places for cars to park, there's a bike lane, which we can't use. There's now restaurants taking up all of the street we can park. On Duane Street alone, there's Mark Fugione and K.O. That whole street, the entire street they closed. There's no through traffic. Do they really need the whole street on Duane Street to just have a few seats that they're sitting there to eat? It's so disrespectful for anyone trying to make a living. We want the same kind of acknowledgement that we're trying to make a business. We're selling balloons, all kinds of things in the store. We may not be selling some kind of fancy meal on a plate, but for heaven's sake, you're closing a whole street where people can't come and go through. And I really, really need help, Gail. It's gotten so horrible. I understand that you're a person who wants stats and you want to show how all of the vacancies, which landlord has a vacancy and how much their rents were and how, when it was vacant and all that information. But for heaven's sake, the information, what is that going to do? We need help. We need help with crime, sanitation, homelessness. We need a place that people are going to want to come from Europe and other places to say, yeah, New York's a great place, and not, pardon, a shithole. That's how it's going to be. That is how it's becoming. I come to work and I have to clean homeless defecation in front of my store and have all of these things going on. It's not conducive to a good working environment. That's one segment. So I pay my parking tickets, I pay my taxes, I pay my employees' sick leave, I pay for everything that goes on that I have to. But where is there any kind of help for a small business? Amazon has already eaten up everything, as Brian said. There's no reason for retail. It could go, I'm not talking retail, I'm talking brick and mortar. Brick and mortar stores are going to go the way of the typewriter and the dodo bird. And I have to say, unless, Gail, the bigger issues are done, by making it a safe environment that's conducive for people to want to come, where they're not seeing that people are getting slashed on their faces or all of this racial disharmony. If those issues aren't done, the city is doomed, no matter what you're selling and how many stores are vacant, or how much your chicken parmesan is costing, or your mescalin salad on a plate. I'm begging you, we need help in the legislation department here so that we can make it the same way you would want to serve a beautiful dinner on a table. You would want to clean the table first and then serve it and serve your good food. The graffiti in the city has been absolutely.
Sharon,
Yeah,
just
please.
quickly, I want to say to you, we completely agree as a restaurant owner, and Brian and I would tell you, we want you open and looking great because you're going to bring us business. So, yes, some things have to be, straightened out with what's going on in the streets. They will be, but there's nobody more for you than Brian Owens, myself, and because we're in this together.
I know we are.
And I know Gail has heard some of these things he's saying. It's not going to be the first news to her. So I just want to let you know that from the restaurant thing, and also getting back to probably what we're going to talk about is the value of property.
No, Peter, yeah, no, that's a great point. And Sharon, thank you for that as well. And so one of the things that I think is important to delineate in this conversation as well is that a lot of the things you mentioned are symptoms of a much, much greater problem. And that's one of the things we want to discuss today too. What is the root cause of a lot of these problems that we're seeing through the rest? And so, for example, homelessness, what is the relationship between that and increased housing market prices as well, and the displacement of people? And so that's actually a good point that, moving on to the next section. And at the end, we'll also talk about where we go from here. What are the things that business owners, as small business owners, that you need to see as thoughtful solutions going forward? Because quite often in these discussions, we, hear from people and who aren't necessarily on the ground or don't have experience with this type of work. But this is the opportunity to hear directly from business owners like yourself. So we will get into the future and what we want to move on to there.
And thank you for the forum. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And so I'd like to get to the point of thinking about, there's this idea of being preventative, but there's also a point of that we have to be reactive because these changes have already been undergoing throughout our communities for a very long time. So I want to talk, and I'll throw these questions out there, and if you want to jump in on them, please do so. But I want to talk kind of to what the borough president was talking about earlier when she mentioned, businesses, noticing that they own their storefront, they own the property, they have that real estate. And so as we see this increased housing market, taking into effect, how has that affected small business owners and compared those to who rent to who can now own their property? And I don't know, Borough President, if you want to start off the conversation on that. If we've seen a change.
I would like to see, it's not always possible, but somebody, I know I have a couple of store owners who managed to condo their space, and it has been a blessing in terms of their future. Because today I was walking up and down the avenue and somebody just I thought he was going to cry. He was so happy he got a 10-year lease with some of the reasons that you're thinking, which is that the owner realized if he didn't have that person, then he might have a vacancy forever. So, that's a bit of silver lining for the pandemic. But I don't know how many individuals, but I do think the city, the state, and the federal government should be helping people like Sharon and others to figure out if there is a way to condo the space so that they own it. And then you still have a tax issues. Jessica's right, we can have more conversation about that. But in this very challenging market, that is how you keep some of the smaller stores. So I'd love to have a conversation about that. It never seems that government is helpful in that way. So I don't know, I'd like to have a discussion of it.
Yeah, and we'll get to that towards the end about the role that government plays in all of this and what kind, but especially with the context of new city leadership at the end of this year. What is it that we should be demanding as community boards, as residents, as neighbors, as small business owners from that new leadership? But Rose, I want to throw it to you as the Frederick Douglass Boulevard Alliance, the founder of that. How have you seen the businesses that you work with, the trend in owning, renting, what it used to be and what it seems to be going to now? Oh, Rose, you're muted. Let me.
Sorry about that.
problem.
So what I would say, particularly what we've seen in Harlem, there are not as many opportunities for these condo type spaces, and a lot of time for those properties that do have a commercial condo, the cost is so exorbitant that it's not even viable for businesses to be a part of. So I think, again, there needs to be some kind of regulation in terms of how the leases are negotiated. I think what Gail is talking about, our borough president is talking about, is to identifying opportunities. What we've seen on the boulevard is that many of the businesses have been priced out because those rates, one restaurant in particular that I'm thinking about, which was Harlem's first beer garden that was innovative and exciting. And, again, this is part of this conversation about, as the community and the neighborhood changes because of housing, there are some things and amenities that come that are positive, but they just closed because their landlord, increased their rent, doubled their rent, right? And that it was the pandemic, and they were like, we can't stay. Fortunately, another restaurant from Lenox Avenue is coming to take that space, but like Peter said before, I think you have to keep in mind, not only because of COVID and the housing costs, but you also have to factor in the financial crisis that also took out businesses as well. And that had a rippling effect throughout neighborhoods in Northern Manhattan. And I think the one thing that when we're talking about creating opportunities for ownership, you have to have businesses that are ready to take advantage of that. So how do we identify those businesses as we are identifying those spaces, and to make sure that they're ready to make the pivot and take advantage of those opportunities, particularly at this time?
Thank you, Rose. One of the things that sticks out about what you were just saying is about, we keep hearing the word cost. And so I want to throw this over to Jessica Walker to think about the businesses that you're working with. What is the experience of access to capital? Is there an equitable access to capital? Are we seeing some businesses have that and others not? Or what's been the experience for small businesses? Or
Yeah, absolutely. So before COVID, there was quite a bit of discrepancies here. So we know from data that minority-owned businesses were already at a deficit in terms of the cash reserves that most of these small businesses had on hand. So coming into the crisis, they were already disadvantaged. And of course, we've seen that with the PPP uptake, we've worked really hard. We have actually boots on the ground, people going door to door throughout Manhattan trying to get businesses signed up for PPP and other federal help that's available out there. But we have seen that sign up among minority-owned firms have not been as high as other places. So there certainly is an issue here. And it's something we're really focused on, but I think it's something everybody needs to be aware of so that we can all be getting the word out. There is still time to get PPP. And just as a little plug, we will sit down, we will go to a business, we will help them with their application. This is just money that we just need to get out of Washington. So anybody who needs help like that, please reach out to us.
Kyle, can I just say one thing to piggyback off of that? Is that businesses have to be ready, because when PPP first came out, these businesses are like, I'm trying to turn my, let's say restaurant into a place that, instead of serving food, can be a place where people can buy certain goods and items. I've got to deal with my staff. I've got to figure out how I apply for this. And many of the businesses, particularly uptown, was like, I can't even wrap my head around PPP. So one of the things we have to think about is, how do we help those businesses? Some of them have systems, but some of those businesses do not have systems, are not digitized, do not do delivery, could not even think about how to make that change to be ready for PPP. So I think this is a really big issue that you're raising around technical assistance, and kudos to you for doing that. But I do think there is a capacity issue about how do we make sure that, particularly in minority-owned businesses that oftentimes are placed on a very high scrutiny when it comes to obtaining resources, that we make sure that when these kinds of federal programs come about, that they have the opportunity to be ready and to participate.
Thank you. And I think that goes to a point that Jessica Lappin was making about the property taxes and all of these other sort of costs that go onto landlords and small business owners. So I just wanted to talk a little bit more about sort of directing it around, why is there high rent in the first place? You know, why is this a cost that small businesses then have to pay, and why are they being increased? Is it simple, you know, capitalistic greed, and that, you know, they just want to raise rents as high as possible, or are there other factors that are?
No, it's super complicated, and I'm going to come to that in a second. I just want to, I mean, Rose is 100% right, and I saw this was a question either in the chat or in the Q&A. Somebody asked about kind of areas where there are business improvement districts, and I think there's no question that, you know, we were very aggressive and proactive in helping our businesses apply for PPP. I mean, obviously, I mentioned that we had an $800,000 grant program that we administered ourselves to businesses in the district, helping them connect with each other, marketing them, making sure that everybody in the neighborhood knew who was open, who was closed on a real-time basis. So that was a big boon, because Rose is right. I mean, in almost, you know, people who are struggling every day in the best of times to keep their business afloat can't wrap their mind around these things. Frankly, like I couldn't, like I saw my husband apply for PPP, like it's super complicated. It's not easy. And so I think, you know, it was a place where businesses all over the city who were in areas that had very active bids, it was a help to them. And it was sort of heartbreaking to see, you know, people who just missed out on that opportunity because it was a little bit too complicated. But again, when you talk about rents, you know, I think it gets confused, right? But owners still have mortgages to pay, still have their property taxes that they have to pay. And you know, my friend Fred Cerullo is watching today, our former finance commissioner, and runs the obviously Grand Central Partnership. He knows a lot more about property tax than I do. But we've been on a lot of calls, and like it would be counterintuitive for you to think that like taxes have gone up, assessments have gone up. People aren't, it's not like the economy fell off a cliff and all of a sudden people had this reprieve. They didn't on any level, both the small business owner and up the chain. And so, you know, that's something that has been not addressed, I think, adequately. And as you know, moving forward, if we really want these businesses to just survive, there has to be a real conversation. That's one of the things government can do, is come up with a tax policy that, you know, whether it's repealing commercial rent tax, which Jessica Walker has worked on greatly, or, you know, there are a million things that we don't have time to get into, but, you know, that has been lacking. That discussion and that leadership has been lacking, I think, unfortunately. And I don't know if we'll get to it, but that I will get to it. But one thing you raised, Kyle, that I wanted to mention, your point about what can community boards do as well. You know, I think far too often I've seen all over the city, people move into a neighborhood, whatever neighborhood that is, they choose that neighborhood, and then they come to the community board and they complain about the small businesses that are there. And I've seen it time and time again for a million reasons. They don't want to renew their liquor license. They don't like that this store is there, and they think there should be a different store there. And it's, you know, and somebody else raised this in the chat as well. Like, what can we do as New Yorkers? Like, I think it's incumbent upon all of us, and particularly those who are at that community board level, when small business owners come before you, they're terrified. You know, this is not what they do, right? They're not comfortable. And I think, unfortunately, so many of you try to make them feel comfortable, but there are people from the public or others who don't. And that makes it, even on an emotional level, setting aside all of the financial issues, like really hard for them. And I think that's something as neighbors and friends that we all need to be a little bit more mindful of, that when we move into a neighborhood, that's the neighborhood we're choosing, and it has to be reflective of all of us. So
Kyle, if you don't mind, Peter Walsh. Yeah, I would like, especially Gail, when we bring up about commercial rent controls, it goes, everybody, falls down, has heart attacks, especially the real estaters. And we know they have to pay huge loans they borrow to buy the land. What about looking at a city-state taxes funding a give back program? In other words, we know what small business pays in taxes. We know what restaurants pay in taxes. So we know that. And based on what they pay, give back 40% during this, revival after pandemic. You choose a certain amount of time, and because let's say a small business cheats on their taxes, well, then they're not going to get back what, if they had been honest, what they would have gotten back. So if we take state, city taxes, and if you want to even include payroll taxes, that's the way to funnel the money back into small business, making it honest money, and a way of regulating it, because already you have the information.
Makes sense to me. I know there was some discussion at one point, if you are at Coogan's or anything that Brian Owens or Sharon, in other words, your owner operated, that you would get a break as the owner of the building. That would have to be state. But anyway, all of these ideas are out there. That would make sense, Peter. It might be easier to do what you're talking about. But taxes are very much where the challenge is. You're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you. I want to move to Peter Arnson. So as the district manager for the bid, I was wondering, what have you seen for the businesses that you're representing in your particular neighborhood? What are some of the changes that come to neighborhoods when the increased housing market takes place, and what effect does that have on small businesses? Is it positive? Is it negative? Sharon had shared some of the changes that had happened in her neighborhood, and just wondering what you're seeing in your area.
Well, okay, thank you. Rose had referred to Frederick Douglass Restaurant Row, and we've basically had a similar evolution in our neighborhood. We have had, our neighborhood was low income, working class, had a lot of problems with drugs and other gang activity. That changed through a number of years of working on it. People like Phil Reed, who used to work in city council, created a massive change with creating parks that attracted people. And the restaurants became a go-to in terms of bringing people into the neighborhood, so that people will travel from south of 96th Street or north of 110th Street to come and find really good restaurants that are affordable. And so that's been one of the changes that's happened, and that's continued during the pandemic. I mentioned before the 5 new restaurants. I will say that in terms of the government, that DOTs really took a chance with us and gave us the open streets for restaurants. It was on an avenue that has a bus route, that is a truck route, and they said that they weren't going to do it in their guidelines, but then they did it for us. And that has been a huge benefit for the businesses in the neighborhood. And it has attracted people from, again, south of 96th Street. When I came into the city in the 80s, you weren't supposed to go north of 96th Street. Columbia had a pamphlet that said, don't go south of 110th, and they wouldn't allow you to live south of 110th. So that has been a major change for our neighborhood. And I'm sorry, I got off on a tangent perhaps. What was your question again?
That's really fine. I just wanted to hear, I mean, you actually did answer it. I just kind of hearing about what were the changes that came to your neighborhood and whether that was a positive or negative for the small businesses. One of the, the example that Sharon had made was that for example, bike lanes are something that's being discussed, and she's had a negative experience with those things. But as
Wait, let me interject, Kyle. I'm a biker and I love to bike and I respect the bike. I love bikers and I always advocate them wearing helmets.
Right.
So, and the delivery people, Gail, you should advocate that they have to wear lid helmets. They need protection at night. And I feel for them. I really do. And I love the bike lanes. It's great. But I'm simply saying, take the bike lanes, take the restaurants in the street, take the garbage spilling over. It makes it really like a quagmire of craziness, especially at night in the city bikes, because there's no enforcement about what's going on. So I love bikers and I think the bike lane's fabulous. And I've gone to Amsterdam where there's zillions of bikers and everybody always coexists, but it seems to be that the streets are shrinking and there's absolutely nowhere between the Ubers and everything else to make a delivery, to hand off balloons to somebody. It's just crowded. We have to park our truck across the street now. So the people have to go through all of that busy traffic because the cyclists are going through. So I respect the cyclists and I love that in the city. I think it's great.
Yeah, no, my
But
point
the
was
tickets that we get are crazy. Please have them have a little bit
yeah.
of.
So getting into that too, that was kind of more my point. Was more of like how, when we think about the shaping of future of New York City, where is sort of the systematic, togetherness of the changes we want to make? Is it simply like, hey, like, let's get this thing done? Or is there actual thought to a cohesiveness and a system put together for all of these changes?
Well, I think the restaurants in the streets were all just, let's get it done to help the restaurants. And I love the restaurants, but I don't think the way they were put together was long thought.
Right.
Nothing has been
done
long
very
thought.
quickly by DOT. And I will say that we fought for the bike lanes. I am a biker, and it hurts to see the way that a number of bikers are disrespecting the law, disrespecting people with speeds and with
The electric
going
bike.
through traffic and making it difficult for. I would not want to be a driver, given what's happened with the electric bikes, and they scare a lot of people, and that makes it difficult. We have a lot of youth and a lot of elderly in our neighborhood, and I hear it from both sides. And I mean, I depend on those bike lanes for safe passage for lots of people. I wouldn't let my daughters ride unless we had those bike lanes, but just they're not getting it paid attention to, and they're not being respected the way they should be. And initially it made a difference in terms of who rode on the sidewalk. Now that's less so. And
I think I just want to say one thing about this.
Borough President, I was actually gonna bring it to you anyway, because I want to get back to the housing market issues. There's a lot of tangential issues to this as well, which is exactly why, again, we want to talk about the root cause of it. But particularly, Borough President, if you could give us a little bit more of sense about like the time lapse of this process. When we think about higher rents taking place and then businesses being shut down, brick and mortar, what is that process like? Is it simply that, okay, the rent is high and now I got to leave? Or, is it more early on in the process? Or is there a certain amount of sort of high priced housing that needs to be occupied before the businesses actually change?
Well, before I'll try to answer it there. I don't know if I can. It's a really good question, Kyle. But I just want to say we need a public realm czar. There are 25, I counted them, agencies that work in the streets, whether it's Sharon's issues, which are real, or anybody else's. You can't have DOT, you got homeless, you got the buildings department with the scaffolding. I could go through the list, so could Jessica Lappin and others. 25 agencies, state and city, no coordination. And I just want to start there because that would help with one agency talking to another about what the issues are. So that's I've tried, I haven't gotten anywhere, maybe the next administration. The issue of the housing, your question is so important and complex. And it has to do with recovery right now. I mean, before we were dealing with 65 million tourists. How did the tourists get to Upper Manhattan as opposed to Midtown Manhattan? All of those kinds of things that are we don't have any tourists now. So it's a very different discussion. I don't know, if these, whether it's commercial, residential, because we have many in Manhattan, we have a lot of residential vacancies also, not to mention commercial, and how they're going to get filled and by whom and how that impacts I would rather have government, and you mentioned this earlier, try to think first about keeping our owner occupied in some of these vacancies. We don't have any program for that. We don't have any thought for that. We have some art to the credit of some of the bids going into some of these vacancies, and that's fabulous. But I think I'd love to have the same conversation. How are we going to deal with the taxes? How are we going to deal with quality of life? And how are we going to deal with the vacancies? I don't know how to answer your question, except we and the community, and me included, need to have that kind of coordination as soon as possible while we have this silver lining of opportunity of very low commercial rents.
You're so right, Gail. And I just want to say the consolidation. When we used to finish a party, catering an event, I would just look at my staff and I say, okay, we can be out of here in 5 minutes. We got to consolidate the plates, consolidate. And it's all based on the same thing with one-stop shopping. If you want to go for licensing, permits, it should be in one building where you do it all in one-stop shopping. It should be an ombudsman that represents you from the government, who takes you hand by hand through the process. Boston, if they couldn't get you a permit in 30 days or give you a reason why you didn't get it, there were no charges for when you did get the permit. I mean, that was really, that's stepping up to the plate. That's stepping up to efficiency. But, when we consolidate just our departments on this with consumer affairs, the health department, the fire department, and all this, we're also making the government more efficiency, and there's a way of saving money there. But I felt it very sad. I was the person who expedited. I never hired an expediter. I did it myself through the system. And the first thing I had to do was control my temper, because I dealt with people who really weren't representing the bureaucracy with full knowledge, I thought. So that was the first thing. So I started treating people like children. When Rose was speaking before about what was going up in Harlem, it was the same thing, dealing with the bureaucracy. So it has to be revolutionized and consolidated. It has to be put in one building. It can't be separated where you go from Wall Street to 125th Street on the same day to check out what's going on with your licensing. So that's one of the things. The other thing I wanted to mention was 300,000 people have changed their address during the pandemic in New York City. 300,000 people, according to the post office, have given new addresses. Now, I think most of them have left the city. Most of them. We used to have 1 million people per day come into New York City. We probably have about 40% of that today. At Times Square, when you dealt with the amount of people that would walk through Times Square, at the height of the pandemic, it was 16%. It's now only 42% at Times Square, the people walking around. So we're in an emergency. We don't have enough time to really have seminars about this. We have time, as Sharon said, we have to make decisions. And every decision has to be based on safety, a quality of life, and getting this city back on its feet.
Absolutely.
We got rid of one guy at the national top, and we put somebody in place who's now solving problems. And we have to do that now in New York City itself. We should be right now revolutionizing the way we look at things. Even the delivery of food to the restaurants and to the grocery stores is fragile. That's an emergency that's going to go on beyond the pandemic. I'm sorry, Kyle.
No, perfectly. I mean, that's actually what I want to sort of like end on is future, because again, lots of leadership posts up in this fall, and
oh boy,
we have ranked choice voting and all of that stuff. And so this is really an opportunity. This is one of the things. So why all of the community boards came together, because we said, hey, this is an opportunity post-pandemic to really start to accomplish the things that we've been discussing about for a very long time. This is the time for action. But just before we get to that section, I want to throw this question to the bids who have joined us tonight, but to thinking about commercial landlords. So when we think about who is actually, the landlords for a lot of these properties, we've talked about the mom and pop landlords, we've talked about commercial landlords as well. So just from your experiences at the bid level, are you seeing that landlords sell their buildings to, corporate or commercial, landlords once there is some sort of housing market increase? Is it what exacerbates that in the first place? Is it sort of like the chicken and the egg, or what sort of changes are we seeing on that end? Because there used to be a time where the landlords were mom and pop themselves and working class people, and now we're kind of seeing not that at all. So I'm just curious from the bid level, what are you seeing?
That's me, I guess.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. So, I mean, look, Lower Manhattan is a little bit different, I think, than other commercial business districts, given that, we do have 90 million square feet of commercial office space. And that said, there is a healthy mix, I think, more surprising than people would think in Lower Manhattan, of smaller owners who do own a building or two buildings, who were immigrants, who invested because it was a down market for a very long time. And I think, and I'm not saying that we don't have massive landlords, of course we do, but we have a real mix. And it has been really hard for some of the owners who just own one or two buildings, who have been hit, pretty hard. But I would say in terms of the conversion piece, and there has been this discussion because there are proposals floating around in Albany, modeled somewhat on what did happen post 9/11 downtown, actually started in 95 with Carl Weisbrod, but this program that did allow for residential conversions in commercial districts. The truth is they're complicated to execute. I won't go into all the reasons why, but they're expensive. You have to have leases rolling. You have to have basically a vacant building that also has floor plates that work. So, the idea that you would have this sort of massive conversion, even if it were permitted, is not what would probably play out. I would come back to, where I sort of started, which was the fact that we have 64,000 residents, or did pre-COVID, downtown, was a huge boon to us in terms of supporting our small businesses. And we have the lowest median residential rent downtown that we've had since the financial crisis. Rents have gone down quite a bit downtown. They're still high, but they're much lower than they were. And so I think this idea of having mixed communities in terms of live, work, play, mixed use really has been a benefit to us. And I think something to think about in other neighborhoods where it's appropriate, right? Maybe not industrial neighborhoods, maybe not manufacturing neighborhoods. Every neighborhood is different. That's the beautiful thing about New York City, is we are this mosaic of lots of beautiful, unique neighborhoods. So what's going to work downtown isn't going to work in Harlem, isn't going to work in Sunset Park, isn't going to work in Long Island City. But again, your question about leadership, and hopefully we're going to have some new leadership after this next set of elections, is having this, sort of taking this moment and this opportunity to really think about, if we're going to have open streets forever, what does that look like? What does that mean? And how is it equitable in every neighborhood? If we're going to take commercial space or hotel space and convert it, how does that work in every neighborhood in a way that's fair and equitable and helps us create more affordable housing? And so I'm really looking forward to whoever wins, and like having some real conversations and having some leadership about tough conversations, but taking this difficult moment and moving us forward in a positive way, because there are some real opportunities amidst all of this tragedy.
Thank you. Is there anyone who wants to build on that, or?
Kyle, we do not have specifically commercial landlords up in our neighborhood. It's basically mixed use buildings with residents and the commercial spaces on the ground floor that are typically about 20 feet wide. So it's not anywhere near what Jessica deals with downtown. So I'll pass on that question unless you've got some further expectation from me.
Thank you, Peter. No, that was great.
But at the same time, Peter, the rents that are being offered leases right now have gone down. Condos are 20% down in sales, just in condos. And then with all these empty stores, there's a natural tendency where rents are going to go down. I mean, that's the tendency. These people have to rent them. There's no benefit to an empty store, especially for the small real estater. There's no benefit at all. It's a loss. So getting those filled, the prices will go down, and we're going to stay away from commercial rent control. That's why I brought up about giving back part of the tax money to the small business person.
You could look at all of those things, and I respect everyone's opinion, but I have to say, you can't ignore the elephant in the room. Crime, homelessness, mental illness, sanitation, quality of life is going to draw people out like a vacuum cleaner. That's it.
I hear that from everyone, Kyle and Sharon. I have to say it is, whether
Thank
it's
you.
from the unions talking Midtown on their daily calls with the governor's office, or it is the shopkeepers. I hear the same thing, Sharon.
Well, what can we do? I mean, the crime is unbelievable. The police, I had the police in the store the other day. Their hands are tied. Everything is upside down crazy. I don't know what to do. I'm in tears already.
Well,
Because
Gail, the last time I knew it was 20,000 single homeless in the city. That was my, Gail, I'm sure that changes quite a bit. Families, I think, with 38,000 homeless families. But the 20,000 single homeless they just lump them together. They don't diagnose it. They don't say, okay, these many are psychologically deprived. This many are drug addicted, which is usually the same as the psychologically deprived. They lump everything together, and it's almost they're afraid to diagnose it because some have to be separated until they're well enough to come back and be able to mingle with our senior citizens and our children and our society. And nobody wants to talk about it because it sounds like we're putting them locking them into institutions and camps, which we have to get away from that thing. We are helping them find themselves. And we have to, it's the same as I say with street vending. Street vending is the enemy of a small businessman, but I want to take them and turn them into small business. Now with all the vacancies, let's get these guys off the street and give them stores. That's the natural way it should go.
So Peter, that's a great segue to the next topic about how we move forward and prevention. And I know that, again, I want to remind everyone, I know there are a lot of tangential issues, and as community boards are coming together to do a series of programs on these various topics. So we will be discussing amongst ourselves, topics like public safety, homelessness, things like that. We want to focus this one on the pricing out of businesses, and so from the housing market. So going to that point, I want to hear, I know this is for the small business owners, so Peter, Brian, and Sharon. You had mentioned earlier in our conversation, a lot of the, let's say, regulations or ticketing, things like that, that have been impacting your business. Can you share a little bit more about what that is exactly, so that a lot of us who may hear about this and conceptually that businesses are heavily regulated and getting ticketed for X, Y, and Z. Can you speak to more specifically what that is and how it's been impacting your business?
Well, it's very similar to what we accuse policemen have to basically bring in, solve crime, bring in people and give out tickets every day. It used to be, a whole thing that the police are forced by the commanders to do this. Well, it's the same thing with the bureaucracy. It seems that they are forced to come in and show that they're able to find people rather than to help people. And this should be the job. It should be working in tandem with small business or with the public in general, working together to solve problems, but they don't come in to solve the problem. They come in to find you. It's like if your mother came into the room when you were 7 years old and, your bed wasn't made. So you're staying in for the whole day. Well, this is basically, they want that because they prove their own entity that they are worth their job. And so I think there's a pressure on them to do that. Now, I've had on St. Patrick's Day a health inspection. That's the biggest day I have in the year. That pays my taxes for the year. And I had this guy come in and I said, you realize what today is for me? And he says, it doesn't matter. I'm at work and you do your inspection. I said, okay. And I gave him the inspection. You know, we had to do it. Here he is pulling me away for work for approximately 3 hours, taking him around. And it was a terrible thing to go through. It was a terrible thing to go through. So there's a whole mindset that has to be changed. And I think when I said consolidate, as far as consolidating where the offices are for these people and how you would get permits, it's the same thing as consolidating this. If you try to get, as you know, Sharon said before, and I'm going to segue into homeless a little bit, the police don't want to get involved with that. They don't want to come, get involved with a homeless person. They don't want to get involved with an illegal vendor on the street. They want to solve the crimes that really threaten the whole safety of us, not really the quality of life things. So the community boards are the only leaders that can do something on this. The only leadership is community board, and the reason is they know what the community needs and they know what it wants. Some communities want street vending. Some communities don't. Well, let's the community boards make those decisions.
Peter, you're absolutely right. They're motivated to make tickets and they have a quota that they have to do. And if there's signs that say trucks loading and unloading between 9 and 6, and we're loading a truck and going back into the store when we're grateful to have deliveries, they give us a ticket because nobody is there with the door. We're walking across the street. They see us and it's just brutal. It's like a hammer on a whack-a-mole. It's really making it very tough for businesses in the city. Small businesses, you just want to put your hands up. And you'll get robbed probably if you put your hands up. But I can't even walk in the street with my cell phone out. So I know all of you understand this. And believe me, I feel for all of the restaurateurs that were allowed all of this space outside. And if they were really good, profitable, delicious, yummy restaurants, they should be able to make it when people come back. And have a community that's kind of, we all put it all together so that it works for everyone. I just don't know how to operate. I know we've gone through a change in the community. And Kyle, I'm telling you this because I've been there since it was all blue collar and the whole neighborhood changed to Tribeca families and whatnot. But right now, if there's no tourists coming in and people are fleeing in droves because of the quality of life, what are we supposed to do? All of these other things that we're discussing really is just like sprinkles on a major cupcake. We really need to look at the core issues of quality of life and how we could support our businesses. I love being there. I see kids that came in when I first started with their own children, but now they say they left, they're gone. They don't want to be in New York anymore. It's not conducive to a quality of life.
Kyle and Sharon, we had 64 million tourists in 2019. 64 million
65,
tourists.
Peter, 65.
Thank you. Sorry. That other million was in my Coogan's at the time drinking. But it gives you an idea. They're not here. So that's an incredible drain on the economy and on business. Incredible.
Yeah, I want to let Brian jump in really quick. I don't know if you have anything to
Well,
add.
you know, my fear is that are they going to come back and look to make up for lost fines? Because we've been out of business for so long, and they need to generate that revenue.
Yes, count on it.
That's a major scare. Is that we kind of feel like just a blank check, writing fines and violations to the city, and God forbid you miss one of those fines. Or it doesn't get paid on time.
Mm-hmm.
We have to, as a mom and pop restaurant, we don't have departments that just work on this, you know? So, you know, who really, you know, it's amazing that Peter's able to, you know, do the expediting on his own. But, you know, we have to hire different, you know, specialists who fight certain violations given out. The fire department ones that have to do with C of O are criminal. So you actually have to hire a criminal attorney to fight those. And there's other ones that, you know, Department of Consumer Affairs and the Health Department and Department of Finance. And now there's Department of Transportation and there's a building department. I'm sure I'm missing 5 other agencies that can walk in on any given day. And I'm on a
25.
group text on WhatsApp with 100 business owners in New York City. And sometimes I just, I get these texts saying, DOT just came and inspected me and they're asking for this new permit. Or they're saying that we need to have our filters changed. We need to have a license for that. And all these things that, if I consider myself a savvy business owner and, I work with the Hospitality Alliance and I'm very involved with, people in the industry. How does someone who, English is a second language really understand that? It's just a lot to comprehend. So I think that, we have to get support from the community, not just, okay, please give us permission to open up in your neighborhood and get a liquor license and argue about the time that you can stay open till. But, where's a ribbon cutting ceremony? Where is, the support from all these new buildings going up that should be told about, businesses and staples in their neighborhood and why they should support them. So I think that there's a disconnect between community boards and supporting businesses moving forward, and that, just city agencies using us as a slot machine.
Rose,
Can I interject one other thing with the slot machine?
let me just go to Rose really quick. She's
Sure.
had up for a while. Thank you.
So just a couple of points I wanted to make. I hear the piece about homelessness and quality of life issues loud and clear. Know that in communities like such as Harlem, we were experiencing that before COVID, right? Because when you look at overall policies for neighborhoods like this in northern Manhattan and other parts of the city, where you already had an a proliferation of clinics and shelters and other types of entities that have been just oversaturated in our community. So when you walk down 125th Street, it's an entirely different experience now that I know that the bid is looking at. So we certainly feel your pain, and I know that communities of town have been feeling that for a long time, and there are organizations that have really been working very closely with the borough president and her team to address those things. Secondly, I want to say in terms of enforcement, particularly all businesses, but particularly for restaurants that had to deal with closing, then, you were able to set up in the street. Then they changed the regulations for, how that structure needed to be. Certain businesses had greenhouses. There was, different types of enforcement. So you would go downtown, you'd see these gorgeous greenhouses. Where we are on Frederick Douglass Boulevard, people came and enforced and said ours were illegal. But I can go to 23rd Street and take pictures of restaurants that had similar structures that were standing up and were being talked about in the New York Times. So I think there's a disparity in the way that neighborhoods, in terms of how that enforcement is experienced. The other thing is, I think, what was just said about one of the things that the community boards can do and local bids in small businesses and neighborhood associations is that one of the things that you see because of these housing changes is that you have people that come to the community that are not as familiar with the small businesses that exist even on their own block. So, I grew up on Long Island. When you move to the neighborhood, you got a basket that told you about all the different things that were happening in the community, the services, and same thing with garbage pickup, yada, yada, yada. I think we have to think about how we bring our neighbors into this conversation and the process, not just the 50 members of the community board, but how we can engage those members of our community, those who have been there forever, and those who are new, to understand that we are one community and one city, and to really strategize about how we can invest in our neighborhood businesses, and that it's something that we should do that should be intentional. But the other thing we haven't talked about is the SLA, which I know has given a lot of headaches to businesses, those who have tried to open and had to delay openings, but still had to pay rent despite that. These, I agree with Peter that all of this kind of, we have to reduce the bureaucracy in a way that supports business owners, that encourages business owners to want to come back into the city, in our neighborhoods, and to make sure that they feel welcomed and not burdened to own a business. Because what you hear a lot of businesses saying, I could go to Florida, I could go to Pennsylvania, I could go to North Carolina and would not have a problem, or Boston, as Peter said, and would not have the same problems we're encountering here in New York City.
Thank you. So I just want to, we have a lot of questions to get to, and I want to make sure that we did define the time until 8:30. So the last question that I'll ask to the group as a whole, and if we can get some quick answers to this, and I know it's more complex, but as we get into the questions, you'll have opportunities to get more detailed. But thinking about the discussion we've had tonight and all the different topics that we've covered, how did these discussions lead to actual change in legislation? What is the strategy that all of you see as the way forward to actually realizing a lot of these things that we talked about? And I'll start off with the borough president, since she's elected office.
I mean, yeah, it's a challenging question. I think about it a lot. I do think right now it's how do we get money to these businesses? And it could be the tax policy, it could be the federal or state grants, the Liberty bonds that took place downtown that could be applied to small business. These, in my opinion, right now, in addition to the quality of life, which absolutely, Sharon, people are bringing to my attention all the time. That's one, it's money to the businesses, one way or the other, either reduction or cash. And the second thing is, there is a challenge when you have, as you heard from Peter Walsh, when you have a vacancy. I see whole blocks vacant right now. I see blocks, and you got the homeless, and you got the garbage, and you get the scaffolding, and it's too much for the business that is there. So the question then is, what are we going to do? Manhattan has more vacancies than anywhere else, than any other borough, primarily because of the fact that we have the workers and they're not here. Other, as you heard earlier, other areas have neighborhood. So I would say that as community boards and as the borough president, we need to figure out what is the vacancy filling strategy. And it could be right now, it could be art, it could be something like a pop-up, whatever. But those vacancies have got to be filled, and we don't have a strategy for that. So those are the two things that I would bring right now.
How about from one of the business owners? How do we get these conversations to actual legislation? What do you think?
Well, number one, let's make Gail the mayor.
Peter Walsh, I don't like the other boroughs.
Yeah, I know. But I used to call Gail the mayor of Manhattan.
Yeah, I don't
but they, how do we get it? We got it. It's just an emergency going on. We have to act like it's an emergency going on, and not like it's time for a seminar or a meeting. I mean, this is nice that we're talking about this now, but we're a year late. We're a year late, and the industry in small business was fragile a year ago before the pandemic. So we're really very late, and in revitalizing the city, we're going to have to think about streets. We're going to have to think about parking, how to bring people out at night. Listen, you have entertainment areas at all your own homes where you are now. You can stay in for a week, get takeout food delivered to you, watch a good number of movies or television shows or sports programs. You can talk to anybody you want on a Zoom, and you don't even have to leave your house. So how do we get people back to socializing with each other? And the newspaper, the real newspaper in New York, is the small business person, is the little restaurant. It's the bartender telling you what happened an hour ago and around the corner. It's going for some fresh bread and finding out from the baker why the price went up and he has to charge you more for some bread. We are the newspaper. We are the texture of every neighborhood there is. And we're important. And we know we're important because we're made important by our customers. So for them, for small business, let's start treating this like an emergency and like we don't have time to do things.
Thank you.
Yes, and tell everyone who's partying at home they need some balloons in that environment.
Definitely. All right, so let's get to some of these questions because they do address a lot of the other things as well. So we have one question that was sent to us and it talks about the vacancies, the storefront vacancies. They said this is not a situation where businesses are forced out because other businesses are willing to pay higher rent. Is there a financial benefit to landlords keeping space vacant?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think so. I don't think, I think there are investments in buildings where people invest in properties and then they're not really living in those places. So they're sort of empty shells that they're using for financial investments. And then since it's an empty investment, there's nobody to come to the shops because nobody's living in them. And I think as a landlord, you would want your place to be rented and you would want the neighborhood to be vital because that's the tapestry of the whole neighborhood, to have all of these interesting shops. You want to visit a neighborhood that has great restaurants, great mom and pop stores. There is absolutely no benefit for empty stores. It brings blight to the neighborhood. But that's what I'm saying to Gail, and I know you've heard it at nauseum, Gail. I know you get it. I'm not the first person to bring the newspaper that the city is in shambles all over the place. And unless we clean that up, we can't do it. Unless the foundation is good, it doesn't matter what kind of lipstick you put on. It's not going to help.
I would like community boards to be taken more seriously also by not only us, but by the city. I mean, there are votes that community boards make just ignored by city departments all the time. The community board it was formed for a reason, as representatives of communities to tell the needs and the wants and the desires of that community, and it's becoming less effective. As you see it in operation right now, because it's ignored by the mayor, because if he wants some real estate done, he's going to get it done, and he's going to ignore. It happens all the time in Washington Heights Inwood. We watched things go that the community board was completely against, that what started being developed right away. So I wish the community board was given the power that we gave to the militia in 1776, not the militia that we give today with these nuts running around. But it's our first touch to the system is the community board.
No, and that's exactly why we all came together as community boards to put together a series of programs because we thought, that there are a lot of things going on. We can't wait any longer.
Yeah.
These issues have been going for so long. We can't wait any longer, that we need to work in unison to amplify these issues across the neighborhoods, because I represent CB6. We have, all of the other community boards as well here, 5, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12. And we want to make sure that even though our neighborhoods are different, we're facing a lot of the same issues, and we need to amplify and work together to get these things done and pull in the people who are actually impacted by it. Again, that's why we wanted to have small business owners on this panel as well, to hear directly from them rather than hearing from someone who's talked to small businesses and has put together some kind of report or something together. But actually building on that point, the follow-up question to that was, so how does the digital divide play into this? And so we touched upon this early on in the program, but are more affluent residents, as they move into the neighborhood, are they more likely to purchase online than from a mom and pop shop? Is this part of the big issue as well? I see you're nodding, Karen. Yeah.
Yes, most definitely. Amazon, you get a smiley box the next day. That's it. Credit card, it's all in there. You just have to push a button. If you're not a service business or a restaurant, it's difficult to be in operation. So yeah, digitally, if you didn't pivot, like we had to pivot where everyone orders balloons online to have it done that way. But if everybody is at home and ordering things on the computer, I think if they have a computer and they have a credit card, that's the way to go. It's easy. You don't have to deal with anybody.
So as we talk about,
and also one other thing, I just want to say that a lot of times people don't appreciate small businesses and what we do. And I'm talking about people in the neighborhood. They really don't. They'll come in and say, oh, I can get this cheaper online. And it hurts me because I employ people, I pay my taxes, we're there making the neighborhood lively. We're part of the interesting factor from Europe and all over the world where people come in. But if they can get it for a little bit cheaper, and they don't appreciate that, if I give balloons to the children or even know them by name or face, I would like customers to really acknowledge how valuable small business is in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I think, Kyle, that's something that what community boards could do and is work with all of the brokers and, you know, whatever else is selling or renting these apartments to describe the greatness of Sharon Shop and others. We never have done that. And it's retail work, but that's something that we need to do. But this digital divide is real. In Washington Heights, when it was the worst of the pandemic, and you know, some bids were able to send out, do this, do that to their customers or to their members. We went door to door in Washington Heights because the bodegas and others did not have even they had cell phones, but they had no computer. So we had to go door to door, texting, but no internet, no email. So the digital divide is real, and it's very frustrating. I hear lots of plans out of City Hall, but I haven't seen any action.
So there's actually a great question. There's actually several questions about this that follow up on that. I'm going to read the one that was presented by Community Board 8 Chair Russell Squire, because I think it encapsulates what everything else is saying too. But this is really about the issue of vacancy. So many claim that there are tax deductions or other financial incentives that landlords have to keep storefronts vacant, but the real estate industry always denies it. So what are the facts about this?
Well, Jessica Walker may know. I've been told that I have a letter from city, state, and federal tax, be it IRS, stating there is no tax advantage. But the owners tell me there's no tax advantage, but you know, others may know, and Barbara Adler has said the same in the chat, but Jessica Walker, you may know.
Yeah, I mean, there really isn't. I mean, at the end of the day, you want a paying tenant. I mean, that's what you're going for there. The vacancies we're seeing now, I mean, it's not rocket science. We are seeing, unfortunately, a lot of small business go out of business. We really are. I mean, Peter said it. We are in a crisis. It looks like, you know, the data that we're tracking, we've already lost maybe a third of the small businesses citywide. Which is
Devastating.
It really is. It really is. And but in this market, I mean, that means there are a ton of vacancies. So that's, you know, everybody is going to probably see their storefront take longer to find a new tenant in this environment. I mean, but the bottom line here is that this is probably, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but this is probably going to get worse before it gets better. We are, you know, the situation has been masked because of the eviction moratorium, because there has been the PPP. So it has, you know, bolstered some businesses who, you know, are probably going to come out of this with a lot of debt. There are some folks who are not paying the rent right now. So, you know, Gail is absolutely right. We need to really be trying to put as much money and savings into the hands of these small businesses to keep them going, so they can get back 100% and get their revenue going again.
Jessica, you're right. A third of the businesses that have closed are never going to reopen again. A third. That's an impact that creates just loneliness on streets, vacuous cities. The whole idea, the picture walking at nighttime at 10 o'clock at night down an avenue where there's closed businesses everywhere. You wouldn't want to be in that city. You don't want to be in that place. It's too dangerous. It attracts everything. Closed businesses attract everything that's bad. It's like moths on neon. All of a sudden, you see drug deals being done on streets you've never seen before. You see trash being left where you've never saw it left before. It becomes just, it's terrible for children. It's terrible for the socialization of our young people.
Canal and Broadway, that's a perfect example.
It's, you know, on the garbage, you know, sanitation, I used to do the garbage can on the corner. We had a program with the sanitation department. I had green bags, and I used to change it ourselves. We did it 4 times a day. So we would change that. That was working, small business working with the bureaucracy in a very positive way. We had the garbage bags delivered to us. So that attitude that has to be followed through on many, many things, not just the garbage, but it has to be followed through on a whole operating small businesses.
I'd like to add to what Peter just said, that he had mentioned earlier the idea of an ombudsman for all agencies, but each agency needs to have an ombudsman. There used to be a person for the supervisor for the sanitation department who would get to know all the businesses. And before he gave them a ticket, he usually visited them twice, once to give them some education, second time to warn them, and then the third time was when he would give them a ticket. But that made a huge difference. That changed dramatically when that role was changed. And all of a sudden we had enforcement agents that tried to avoid talking to you and then left you a ticket on your door. So I think that ombudsman idea needs to be followed up with all the agencies so that there is somebody to talk to and work with. So.
Well, that's like what Peter said before. There's an incentive for them to give tickets. So it's sort of contradictory for them to be your friend. They want to give you a ticket. They need to.
So I want to move on to another question because we are running out a little bit out of time, and I want to make sure that a lot of these questions get answered. So one question was about bids. So this could go to the bids. And actually, to Rose particularly, I think you should start off answering this question because you founded a neighborhood association. But so someone was saying that the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce is trying to help, making sure that neighborhoods throughout the city get the support that they need in terms of grants and advocacy. But what can be done for neighborhood retailers that don't have a merchants association or bid so that help can be targeted?
So as I mentioned before, the technical assistance and understanding that it's not a one size fits all approach. We have particularly in immigrant communities and communities of color, you have monolingual speakers. So we need to understand how do we communicate with business owners that are, English is not their second language, their first language. Also, to really begin the process of educating businesses and neighborhood associations about how do you become a bid, what does it take, what are the steps that need to be followed, what kind of membership do you need to have. So for example, with the Frederick Douglass Boulevard Alliance, it was really inspired by the Downtown Alliance and what they were able to do. So I think, for us, for FDBA, ideally, it would be great to become a bid, but I think that would take a lot in terms of education, understanding the benefits of having a bid. Certainly one of the things that we were able to do through support through our local council member and also, of course, our borough president, Gail Brewer, is that we have street cleaners. And particularly during the time of COVID, just one thing to point out with garbage cans, in neighborhoods like Harlem, garbage cans were taken away because people were putting, trash inside their homes in these public bins. And as a result, they were taken away. So what happened for the businesses? They had added responsibility from normally what they would do for street cleaning. So I think these kinds of investments that need to go into neighborhoods, understanding what kind of technical support is needed, neighborhood by neighborhood, maybe block by block, so that we understand, like Gail does, who's on this street, who's on that street, what do they need, and how do they connect to resources? Not everybody's on their phone like we are 24/7. Not everybody is following the information that they're reading from government agencies. We have to find a way to rethink what these neighborhoods, not only their business districts look like, but how that we continue to increase awareness that these, as Peter said, this is the not only the texture of our community, it's the DNA of our community. So I think technical assistance is a really important thing, because the last thing I will say for PPP, some people, when they understood that they were going to have to hire back a certain number of staff, that they, this was not going to be a grant, but in the first iteration, but a loan. A lot of people said, I'd rather not do it and I'll just close. So I think getting information out to people in real time and doing it in a way that is culturally relevant and appropriate to the communities in which you're dealing with.
Thank you, Rose. And I don't know, Jessica, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Totally agree with what Rose is saying. Just want to clarify. So the Small Business Resource Network is something that our chamber is working on with the other borough-wide chambers. So it cuts across the entire city. And the services are really geared to help businesses survive right now. Services are provided in several different languages. And it is the goal is to provide the technical assistance and link these businesses with expertise. So we're also working with like experts from the Harvard Business School, for example. We do have connections with different banks to help link the small business with potential lenders, that sort of thing. So it is a real resource for those who need it right now. But totally agree.
But I do think it's a door-to-door thing, right? So to have a center, people have to know that there's a center, right? This is specifically directed to you, but I think this is kind of like, you got to knock on people's door. How are you doing? How can we be of service? Here are some resources. I mean, we're trying to do this in Harlem, but I think it has to be not at a distance. You got to be on the ground in communities. And if you don't have a presence there, think about who are the organizations and the associations with, if they're not a bid, because many communities don't have the benefit of having that. How can you partner to be able to disseminate information? So I'm going to be calling you to see how we can partner.
Hey, Kyle, I want to say one thing. It's getting late. I know. I want to thank all the people on the community board who are there. And I know Brian would be saying this if I wasn't saying it, and all the people involved in the restaurant. But you guys, you have a thankless job. You don't get paid. You volunteer for this. And it's something I've always recognized. I used to see people come out of board meetings at 12 o'clock at midnight. And they would end up at Coogan's because they needed a drink by that time. And it was, and I used to look and I said, God, the dedication. And I just want to thank you guys just for having this, for bringing attention to this, bring Gail on at the same time, who I know her support of community boards is important, but especially as a restaurant owner. And I think Brian, Brian, I hope you don't mind me speaking for both of us, but I mean that. And so when you finish your next board meeting, go to the nearest bar and have a drink.
We miss Coogan's.
No, Peter, I want to thank you for your kind words. All of us who put this together, we care very deeply about the neighborhoods that we represent. That's why we are on community boards. That's why we put together programs like this, because we believe that the strength of our neighborhoods are its people, and small businesses are a huge part of that for us. And so, again, as we look forward to the future of New York City, it's important to have these conversations. But not just to have the conversations. Conversations are one part of the equation. The other part is to get things done. And so, and that's what we care about as well. So I do want to recognize that it is just after 8:30. We do have some questions. So if people want to stay, please do stay. We do have like maybe a couple more, but if you have to drop off, that's totally fine. All right. So there.
Kyle, thank you.
Thank you so much.
And Gail, thank you. And
Thank
everyone
you, Sharon.
else.
I'll be in touch.
Thank you for hearing
Everybody.
my tirade.
It's a good one.
There is a question about saving small retail and how the panelists feel about the mix, retail mix of commercial and retail mix to help save small retail. They liken it to the old 421G program that helped recreate Lower Manhattan. I know Jessica Lappin had to jump off, but what thoughts do people have on that, on commercial and retail mix?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Sorry, who's jumping in?
I didn't understand the question.
So there is an issue of commercial retail mix to help save small retail. So and incentivize smaller businesses or business to move in to integrate residential units into, like, for example, midtown commercial areas. So this is from one of from the bids who's attending. For those who are unfamiliar, Midtown Manhattan is obviously going under some development, and a lot of the ideas are about this mixed use of commercial and residential units. This is a way that anytime, like a residential building is built, that there is space carved out for businesses to be part of that same development. So it used to be known as the 421G program that was used to create Lower Manhattan. And you obviously notice a lot of properties used like that. So what are there any thoughts or feelings on that?
Well, I just want to say the issue I think is in Lower Manhattan, and it must have been Hudson Yard, but particularly Lower Manhattan, there's a lot of tax breaks for the buildings that were built. And so if you are a retail, to answer Sharon's question, then you do get sometimes the benefits of lower taxes. The question is, can you make that something that's elsewhere in the borough? And of course, what Jessica Lappin was stating is the taxes are as much of a problem as the rent. So yes, anything that helps bring the taxes down is helpful. There are fewer, in some cases, taxes. They may eventually wane out, but in Lower Manhattan, there was, in order to build post 9/11, there were a lot of breaks given. So yes, something like that in the rest of the city for small business would be, I think, phenomenal.
I think that'd be a great way to own your own property and be an owner occupied, is if there was an abatement given to that, because someone mentioned earlier that you could tell when a restaurant or business has been there for a long time, they probably do own a building, it's well maintained, and they tend to be more heavily invested in their community because they're there for long term, and not that a landlord can just kind of have a demo clause and kick them out prematurely. So I think that if there was a way for business to turn into being an owner, and then you have to then address it with the banks, because I know a lot of banks don't want to have all their eggs in one basket. They're going to basically give you a loan and then also kind of bankroll that you're going to be the tenant. And if you then go out of business, then now you have this huge source of revenue that you can't make up. So I think it has to be thought upon at the banking level too.
All right, thank you. So there was a quick follow-up about the ombudsman idea for the 25 agencies. So Borough President, is this something that you would have to introduce? Is this something with the city charter? Is this a role for the public advocate as well?
I think whoever's mayor, I am pushing it. I'm like a broken record. All the community boards know I have not stopped talking about it. And it came from the great Tim Tompkins, who was head of the Times Square bid. And he's the one that said, Gail, I can't take this anymore. And he left. He's got a new job. But he has been talking endlessly, because on the plazas, on the streets, on the sidewalks, and all of Sharon's issues, 25 agencies, state and city. And he just couldn't take it anymore, trying to get DOT to talk to MTA, et cetera. It probably is legislative, to answer your question. I don't think it's charter, but it would definitely be legislative. Yes, we're working on it.
Okay. And then, so two other questions that we have, which are pretty similar. To give some context to this too. So on Community Board 6, we supported the Small Business Job Survival Act several years ago. And within that resolution, we put in a number of stipulations that we wanted to see from the city about formulaic businesses and retail and things of that nature. So the questions, and I'm putting them together, are what happened to the Small Business Job Survival Act? Where, what's the progress on it? And what if, I guess from one of the attendees, that they care a lot about the no formula retail rule that San Francisco has adopted, and really putting power back into the communities about what types of businesses they want to see in the neighborhoods, and protecting the small mom and pop shops that already exist.
Again, I have to go back to quality of life. You have to fix that first, and then people will flock towards a beautiful place, safe place.
I'm going to, Sharon, you've been saying it all night, but you're right. Safety is the number one thing that all of life is predicated on. Safety is the number one thing. That's how business takes place. That's how life takes place. You have safety, you can have joy. If you have safety and joy, you can have an intellectual experience. An old nun told me that when I was like in the 8th grade, and it hasn't changed. The same thing problems in the 1960s were housing, education, and jobs. It hasn't changed. Now during an emergency, we have a couple of other things that go along with that. But it's not like having one thing to solve. As soon as you try to solve one problem, you have to look at everything around it. So you're moving almost an army to win a battle. You have to move the whole army to make sure you win that one battle. If the battle is making sure small business takes alive, then you're talking about housing, you're talking about homelessness, you're talking about everything that goes along with it. But everything predicates on safety.
That's right.
And safety doesn't just come from the police. It comes from the whole tapestry of our society. It comes from who our next door neighbor is. I understand the problems that we've had with certain policemen, but right now, changing the budget for the police department is absurd because the first victims are in neighborhoods of color, because that's where they start pulling people from, and we have to think about this in a whole different way. I want to see more policemen of color, more people who have been trained better at what they do. I don't want to see a shortage of funds going to the police. That's absolutely ridiculous. It's cutting your nose off. I want to see more money going to it and making it something that's part of, that gives us the safety in our lives. And I'm talking about, I was very against stop and frisk. I was against stop and frisk because I said it's more important for a young kid of color to learn how to say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag than it is for him being rousted by some kid who was from Long Island who didn't understand the streets of New York and had become a policeman. I'm born in New York. I'm born in Harlem, lived in Yorkville, and I'm very proud of all those police I've always known. Are they a rotten one? Yep. Some of them are rotten. Just like our society. The police department is a reflection of who we are. So I think if you're going to blame the police, let's blame ourselves.
You have to be respectful.
Well, I'm not looking for that, even that special thing going into it. I'm just saying if we're going to predicate our lives on safety, we have to trust the people. In Ireland, they call it the Garda Síochána, guardians of the peace. And that's what we want our policemen to be. We want them to be guardians of the peace. We don't want them to be proactive people who are rousting young kids and turning them into something that hates themselves and society at the same time. So I know we're segueing into something else, Kyle, but it all comes down to small business at the end.
No,
I
and this
to
is
respond to that, I cannot let that stand.
go ahead, Rose. Yeah.
Foremost, we also need to equally invest in our not-for-profit organizations.
Oh, yeah.
That are the heartbeats of our neighborhoods as well. Especially those small, scrappy organizations that are indigenous to communities that people trust. And what I would say about public safety and where to put dollars, I think the big question is, particularly for people of color, such as myself, who have been stopped, whether I was a deputy borough president, a commissioner, that the changes that need to happen in public safety, everybody wants public safety. I've never heard a person that said they don't want a safe community, but they don't want that at the expense of being profiled. They don't want that at the expense of their fearing that their son or their daughter walking down the street to go get some milk is going to be attacked. So I know we're straying away from this, but I think we need to understand that the strength of communities is the investment of all different kinds of parts that make the neighborhood great. So it's not just public safety, but our not-for-profits have also caught hell during the pandemic. also not getting money from contracts on time. So, that just really gets my back up when we're talking about that and not having a fulsome conversation about the disparities in how services are received, how people in certain communities are treated. So, and yes, small businesses are great. So are not-for-profits, and so are our schools are great too. But understand that there have been disparate experiences based on your neighborhood.
And Rose, I didn't say that without understanding what you're saying. I mean, safety is still the number one thing we all need, wherever it comes from, whether it comes from your parents in your apartment or from that nonprofit. And thank God, I mean, Washington Heights, Inwood, our big business was nonprofits. We didn't have industry. Nonprofits is what we had.
Of course, you just don't want to lose your life over it.
Right.
So before we move on, I just, as many of you know, I'm just the mouthpiece for the Coalition of Community Boards tonight. Put this together, so I want to open it up to the rest of the my fellow community boards. If there are any comments, questions, statements that you'd like to make as well before we conclude the program.
Please help, Gail.
I got it, Sharon. I am going to help. Dwayne Street, I got the whole list. Thank you.
So are there any concluding remarks from the rest of my community board colleagues?
Mark Diller always has something good to say.
I know, I'm surprised Mark isn't saying anything.
I know.
I'm chilling for others tonight, so I'm trying to keep a low profile. Thanks. First, a big shout out to Kyle for a great job with I think there were up to 40 questions at one point in there in that Q&A, and he managed to get through all of them in a way that wove it together. A million thanks to our wonderful panelists. This is the second of two really expert panels that really shed new light on these issues. So congratulations and thanks to the coalition that brought this together. Yes to the idea that the community boards should be taken a little more seriously by the next administration. I hope that will be something that we can add value. Just let us and unleash that power. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Melita, Renee, Cicely, any comments you'd like to make?
I'll just say, Kyle, that as a former chair of CB8 and as a co-chair of the Small Business Committee, we understand that small businesses are really the lifeblood of the community, and that there are changes in housing in Community Board 8, which is the Upper East Side as well, that's had a real impact on small business vacancies and small businesses, and as well as affordable housing. In fact, just today, someone forwarded an email that 3 walk-up buildings were bought for $32 million, meaning those small businesses are going out, and it's a loss to the community. And we see new buildings going up with just lobbies and no storefronts for small business. So there are a lot of changes that could be made potentially, and a lot of necessity, real critical need for these small businesses to help our communities to be the thread that binds us together, as well as the people who live here are the businesses. So thank you for everyone, all of the panelists. And Kyle, you did a masterful job moderating. It is a great privilege to be able to work on these programs. So thank you, everyone.
Renee, would you like to say anything? Cicely?
I will just be brief, and I think the conversation was wonderful. I wanted to thank all the panelists and to you for moderating just all of this. I think there's a lot of food for thought here, both for the community boards and for all of our electeds.
Thank you, Renee. Cicely?
Hello, everyone. Cicely Harris from Community Board 10. I apologize for not having my camera on. I'm a little bit under the weather right now, but again, I just wanted to thank everyone for being a part of this conversation and for continuing to have these engaging and informative conversations that range borough-wide, where we are not just committed to having these talks, but are committed to action and committed to a plan. And I think one thing that we as community boards want to come out of these things are action plans, things that we can take back, tangible things that we can take back to our community boards so we can let our constituents know, our board members, that we have a job to do, that we are dedicated to seeing things through. And I don't think these conversations will end here. Thank you, Kyle, for so much that you've done. But what we want to do is continue to have these conversations, and from this conversation, have a real action plan. And Kyle, I think we can work on doing that borough-wide, where we come up with some real tangible things to put into action over these next couple months and in the summer.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's actually how I wanted to end. I just wanted to encourage all of the attendees in particular to continue this conversation at our local community board meetings. That's where you know that your community board leadership in Manhattan, that the Manhattan Borough President are behind our small businesses. So please get involved, share your experiences, engage in the hard conversations and tough work ahead. And most importantly, please buy from your mom and pop shops. I think one of the big things that I'll speak personally, I get annoyed with is when a small business closes down and everybody comes in on their last night to support the small business and to say, oh, I'm going to miss this place. Where were you all the days before? So let's make sure that we continue to buy from the mom and pop shops. So just to conclude, I want to thank all of our co-sponsors, my fellow community board chairs and their district managers and board staff for putting this program together. And of course, all of our wonderful panelists who spent a lot of time out of their busy schedules to converse, to discuss, to share ideas, and to educate all of us. So I do appreciate all of that. And then lastly, I just want to thank our Manhattan Community Board 6 District Manager, Jesus Perez, for his support and all the logistics for tonight's programs. Put a lot on him tonight, and he's been, doing the puppet strings behind the scenes. So Jesus, I appreciate you so much. So everyone, again, please visit Manhattan Community Board 6 YouTube if you would like to see a recording of tonight's program. If you have any questions or want to follow up, please email us at info@cbsix.org if you have any further questions or concerns, and we can direct you to the appropriate resource. But other than that, I hope everyone has a really great night and stays well. So thank you for joining us tonight and looking forward to the future programs.